Hello friends, welcome back to Shinobi Legacy today. We've got another epic Naruto what if. Let's begin. What if Naruto discovered the forbidden lost arts hidden in the Shinobi library and changed the ninja world forever? Part 1. And let's start this fanfic start now. 5-year-old Uzumaki Naruto frowned as walked through the village of Konoha. For as long as he could remember, he had been hated by just about everyone in the village. In fact, one of the only people who was ever nice to him was Sarutobi Izorin, though he was known better as the Sandaime Hokage. He had 4 Anbu guarding him, but he didn't trust them as far as he could throw them. This meant he didn't trust them a bit, as he couldn't throw them at all. This has been especially true since one of his guards had tried to kill him already. He used to wonder why everyone seemed to hate him but stopped caring after the 20th assassination attempt. This could also be said for the mystery of his parentage. Unlike most people within the village, he had never known of his parents. Hell, he didn't even know who they were. As far as he knew, they could either be dead or had left him in this hellhole. Today, however, the thought of them had finally come back to him. Today had been a regular day, with him walking around getting glared at and glaring back at the villagers. Unfortunately, it was nearing the time for him to enter the Shinobi Academy. Why the old man wanted him to become a shinobi for this village he would probably never know, but he'd do it if only because his grandfather figure had asked it of him. As he was wandering around, he couldn't help but notice parents taking their children out to prepare them for their first day at the academy. He had seen how the kids' eyes would light up when their parents would buy them some practice weapons. He had even seen some parents talking to their children about the basics of taijutsu. His scowl deepened through all of this. Before long, he found himself inside one of the places that had become a safe haven for him within the village, the library. You see, he was often chased around the village by people intent on hurting him or killing him. One of those times he had ended up here after closing. At the time, the librarian had still been inside and had even helped him escape the mob. If that wasn't enough, the kind woman had took it upon herself to teach the boy how to read, write, count, tell time, and occasionally did some shopping for him. She even stayed after closing every night just to help him if he needed something. Through all this, she would always volunteer with a smile and say, "It's the least I could do for my little hero." He had long since given up understanding what that meant. All in all, he would always say Haruno Miho was the kindest woman in the world. Shaking himself from his thoughts, he walked up the steps, and after making sure no one was watching him, which no one ever did, he entered the building, locking the door behind him. Walking inside, he was surprised to find the place empty. Walking up to his usual seat, he saw a note addressed to him from Miho, basically stating she had to leave early for something concerning her niece and that he could borrow whatever he needed and let her know what he took tomorrow. After reading the note, he sat in his regular seat, finding his usual book already there waiting for him. A year ago, Miho had told him the story of how Yondaime defeated the demon fox, and he'd been enraptured by the man ever since. After a while, they happened across this journal that just happened to have belonged to the late Yondaime and had been reading it together. Naruto had been awed by the man who was so much like him. The Yondaime, he discovered, had been an orphan himself and had never known who his parents were. He had eventually created his own surname, dubbing himself as Kazama Arashi. The journal went on to describe the life of the infamous Yellow Flash, up until the point of the Kyuubi attack. Even through all that, he had never once come across anything jutsu related, though it was still an interesting read. Miho had actually let him have this as it wasn't part of the library's collection. He simply kept it here since he didn't want the bastards at the orphanage to take it from him. After about 30 minutes of reading, in which he found out about the Yondaime's wife's pregnancy, the journal ended. Unfortunately, it never mentioned the name of the man's wife. After a few moments to absorb the information, he nodded to himself before getting to his feet. Yondaime had come from the bottom and went straight to the top on his own, and he would do the same. With that in mind, he got to work grabbing some scrolls from the shelves. The first thing he did was grab a scroll giving an in-depth explanation of chakra and its uses. The next he grabbed was one explaining a few chakra control exercises. Next he grabbed scrolls explaining the basics of genjutsu, ninjutsu and taijutsu. After reading through all the scrolls he sighed to himself in thought. The taijutsu scroll had been most helpful and had explained that most shinobi families already had a set form of taijutsu. A few of the more memorable clans mentioned had been the Hyuga, Uchiha, and Inuzuka. The ninjutsu scroll had been much the same this time, the families being the Hyuga, Uchiha, Inuzuka, Yamanaka, Akamichi, and Nara clans. The genjutsu scroll was the same, however the only families mentioned were the Uchiha and Yuhi clans. He frowned at that as all those clans had an advantage over people like him. However, he could see the wisdom in something like that, as even Yondaime had created several ninjutsus to pass down to his children. With that thought he decided he would learn what he could and one day create his own. With that he went to the taijutsu section and eventually pulled out a scroll on ninjutsu entitled, The Ultimate Taijutsu Guide, by someone named Meta Guy. Reading through it he found references to the Hyuga's Jiyuken and the Uchiha's Kosaken, Intercepting Fist. Did I get it right? It also had reference to Guy's own Goken Taijutsu. There were plenty of scrolls for taijutsu, none of which caught his attention. This held true until he finally found two scrolls covered in dust. The first he found was the Heidenryu Kung Fu style. The second was known as the Kikoken, Spirit Energy Strike. While neither of these styles was what he was looking for, he still took them, knowing they might come in handy in the future. While looking through the books and scrolls he was surprised when a part of the shelf fell over. Looking inside he found a single scroll which he quickly pulled out and opened before reading. To whoever has found this, congratulations. I say this because within this very scroll is sealed yet another scroll. In this scroll is what was once called the strongest martial art style in the world, an unnamed Ansatsuken. I say unnamed because the name has long since been forgotten. Hell, it isn't even on the scroll. You may be wondering why I would put such a thing in a library of all places, even if it is a shinobi library. Most people probably would have put it in the scroll room in the Hokage Tower. However, if there is one thing I learned in my life, it was that there is no better place to hide something than in the open. So when Naidame-sama gave this to me for safekeeping, I knew exactly where to put it. I must also inform you that no one else even knows of the scroll's existence, and the style has since been declared as a lost art. I must also tell you that in order to fully master this style there are several things that are needed. One of which is you must be the true successor of the Will of Fire, or you will find yourself falling down a dark path. Unfortunately for you, I have no knowledge of what else you'd need to know to master the style. Hell, you can't even open the damn scroll unless you meet that first requirement. Regardless, if you can't open the scroll, please put it back so that the next person may try. If you can open the scroll, then I wish you luck in learning of what it contains, and I also must ask you to not share the secrets within unless absolutely necessary. Well, that's all for I can say, as we're in the middle of a war right now. Signed, Sarutobi Izorin. Sandaime Hokage Naruto was in awe by the end of the scroll. Hesitantly he followed the directions and pierced his thumb enough to draw blood before swiping it across the kanji on the scroll. The scroll glowed for a moment before there was a puff of smoke which cleared to show a scroll that stood taller than Naruto himself. The young boy grinned seeing this before putting the big scroll back into the small scroll and moving on to the next section. The next section was ninjutsu, where he found a scroll detailing it written by Sandaime himself that he placed within the bag along with one on genjutsu. After looking around a bit more, one final scroll caught his eye, this one on energy manipulation, which was quite old if the dust on it was any indication. Before he left he also grabbed a scroll on basic sealing and hand seals. He knew that since no one would teach him, he'd have to teach himself this scroll. However, he grabbed after remembering Yondaime talking about weight seals. Looking at the time he saw it was already 9 o'clock and felt his eyes go wide. The library closed at 5, which meant he'd been here for 4 hours already. Seeing this he grabbed the bag provided by Miho and left for home. Along the way he silently praised the old man for getting him his own apartment, knowing the bastards at the orphanage would have locked him out. Once he reached his small apartment, he quickly went about storing the scrolls for tomorrow. As he was doing this, he was surprised to find several sets of practice kunai and shuriken as well an outfit. He smiled at that before putting them away, undressing and climbing into bed. The next day found Naruto reading through the scrolls over a bowl of ramen. He had 2 weeks until he started the academy, so he figured he would learn as much as he could until then. As he read what he now called the Scroll of Lost Arts, he felt his eyes widen until they nearly popped out of his head. Apparently this style had been so dangerous that they had to make a variant of it that didn't kill on contact. Even still, with as many people that tried to kill him on a daily basis, he knew he'd have to learn both just in case. Aside from that, he was trying to become a shinobi, which would mean he'd have to kill eventually. With that thought in mind, he quickly resealed the scroll and pocketed it before heading out the door. Looking outside, he couldn't help but feel that things in his life would definitely change one day. The name of the Yondaime Hokage has finally been revealed as Namikaze Minato, so I have changed it to that from Kazama Arashi. Naruto's mother's name has also been announced as Uzumaki Kushina. Well, that's all I've got to say, so here's the chapter. Also, I know I said I don't really like Naru-Saku pairings. However, I have a reason for that. You see, every Naru-Saku story I've ever read has her falling in love with him out of nowhere. In this FIC that won't happen, and their relationship will actually develop from being friends first. Also, in regards to the OC Haruno Miho, she is Sakura's aunt, not her mother, in case anyone was wondering. Also, I'm going to be adding one more person to the relationship between Naruto, Hinata and Sakura. It will most likely be Ino, though I'm not quite sure yet and won't really be worrying about it until the Chunin exams start. Oh, just in case anyone was wondering, the inspiration for this FIC came from Street Fighter 2v, the animated TV show. As such, some things may seem different than what the games say, as I haven't played one since Street Fighter Alpha 2 came out. Also, I'm calling Naruto's taijutsu style the Lost Arts because I could never find the name of it when I started this. Many people have called it the Goken Ansatsuken. However, you should know Goken was merely the name of Ryu and Ken's master. Gutetsu was the name of Goken and Akuma's master, so it's also been called Gutetsu Ansatsuken. I have since found that Gutetsu had originally named the style the Ansatsuken, Assassin Fist, which I will later be referring to it as. Also, the style does indeed have two versions to it. The original, lethal version I will be calling Go Ansatsuken. The non-lethal version that Goken developed and taught I will just be calling Ansatsuken. So any technique you see throughout the story with Go at the beginning are lethal moves. Lastly, the possibility of Sasuke turning evil sometime down the line is still up for grabs. Start now. Uzumaki Naruto was tired. It had been a week since he'd stumbled across the scroll in the library. Since that time he had taken to training his body in preparation to learn the lost arts. He had discovered that he had neither the speed nor strength needed to use the style properly. The day he discovered this problem, he had talked it over with Sandame. He had, however, left out the fact that he had found the scroll wanting to surprise his surrogate grandfather. After hearing the boy's problems, he had shown Naruto to a private training ground behind the Hokage monument. He had done this because said boy had mentioned that he wanted to come up with a style for his family and was worried that the red-eyed bastards would steal it. When asked how he heard of something like that, he merely responded he'd heard some shinobi talking about red-eyed bastards stealing techniques. While showing him to the training grounds, the old man had showed him to a certain shinobi store that he himself uses. The man running the shop had happily supplied them with some weights to help build up his speed and strength. As such, he now had weights on his wrist, ankles and torso. The ankle and wrist weights weighed like 5 pounds, with the torso weighing 20. The man running the shop even said he'd upgrade his weights whenever he needed for free, as long as he bought all of his shinobi gear at his store, to which the blonde had readily agreed. After this, Sandame had gotten the boy 2 training gis, one white and one red, Both came with a black belt to hold up the pants. After that they finally made it to the training grounds after walking behind the monument through the forest to came to a small slab of rock. After a few quick seals and placing his hand upon the wall, the slab slid over, exposing a hallway. Going through the hallway, the blonde noticed that torches lit up every time they got near a dark place. Soon they came to a stairwell to which they had needed to climb up. This had definitely been the hardest part for the boy, as there was at least 20 flights of stairs and he'd been wearing his weights the whole time. Once they reached the top, however, he saw the place was perfect for training. On one side of the grounds was a waterfall connected to a lake. Another part was nothing but rocky ground, perfect for Doden-related jutsus. The rest was fielded with 3 training posts as well as 3 training dummies sitting around. He had learned then that the place was the Hokage's private training area, however it hadn't been used since the Yondaime, since Sarutobi had yet to beat the menace known as paperwork. If this wasn't good enough, Sandaime had taken it upon himself to move him from his small apartment to a condo on near the monument. He had even had his useful things moved there by one of his more trusted junins, someone named Ibiki. Whatever wasn't found useful was left there or burned. Either way he didn't care. Thankfully they had gotten those ugly orange jumpsuits that the people at the orphanage had forced upon him last year. Sandaime had supplied his condo with everything needed. He even had genin teams delivering groceries to his apartment. Finally found a useful purpose for D-ranked missions. The only people who knew he lived there were Sandaime, Miho and Ibiki. After informing the blonde of this, Sandaime wished the boy luck with his training and left him to his own devices. This is how we currently find the young blonde. He was currently in the training grounds he usually called heaven on earth, his red GI dripping with sweat as he tried to finish his 20th push-up. This was a good number in his opinion, as he only started doing these exercises this week. At first he had barely been able to do 5 without collapsing, and now he could do 20 and had yet to remove his weights. Along with these exercises he would do as many sit-ups as possible and run around the training grounds 5 times. He would also swim in the lake doing 10 laps from side to side. After a 30-minute break he would practice with his weapons. Next he would be basic taijutsu practice. 20 punches and kicks for each limb, though he added more each day. After this he would head home for lunch and a shower. Once finished he'd simply put on a pair of shorts and lounge around reading one of the books Miho and brought for him. He would usually read 1 chapter for each book. The first he would read was a book on weapon efficiency, followed by one on the anatomy. Next would be on shinobi life in general, and last he'd read up on what he was expected to know when he attended the academy. By time he'd finished this, Miho would be coming in the door with food. After they ate she'd teach him something else before letting him know what he'd need to read the next day and leaving. Once she'd left he'd crawl into bed and pass out, then he'd get up the next day and do it all over again. Shaking himself from his thoughts, the boy stood to his feet before heading for home. 1 week later, Naruto sighed as he walked onto the grounds of the Shinobi Academy. He had just gotten here and already people were glaring at him or pulling their kids away. He scowled at that before stalking off to his assigned classroom. Once inside he walked straight to the back of the classroom before sitting down next to a window. 30 minutes later the class was full of loud 5-year-olds. He noticed, however, that only a few people besides him were quiet. One was this kid wearing a tan trench coat who seemed to just be staring in front of himself. Another was a black-haired boy who had his head down on the desk. Next to him was another kid who was eating a bag of chips. Finally was a blue-haired girl with white eyes who looked nervous. His attention was brought to the door, however, as a young chunin walked in. The chunin in question had brown hair pulled into a ponytail and a scar running across his nose. As the scarred chunin walked in, he looked around the class and froze as his eyes landed on the young blonde. His eyes narrowed on him and he watched as the boy's eyes turned hard as diamonds, the gentle look he had previously disappearing. Snapping himself from his staring, the man continued to look around the class. He was not surprised when he saw the heirs to Konoha's most renowned clans in the room. He had also known beforehand that Naruto would be in the class, but he had heard rumors saying that the child was dead, so he was surprised seeing him. Shaking himself from his thoughts, he addressed his class. Hello everyone and welcome to Konoha's Shinobi Academy. My name is Amino Iruka. You however shall refer to me as Iruka-sensei, okay? Hi Iruka-sensei. Came the response from majority of the class, though he got a few nods instead. Alright everyone, you should know that you will be attending this academy for the next 7 years, which means you will be 12 years old when you graduate. He paused to let the children absorb that bit before starting up again. I will be your teacher from now until the time the class graduates. For the first 3 years this place will act as a regular school. This means you will learn math, how to read, write, science, and basic taijutsu and weapons handling among other things. After this time, those who do not wish to become shinobi shall be leaving the school and continue their education at a regular school in one of the nearby villages. He paused once more here to let them absorb that information before continuing. Those who continue here will be learning all shinobi-related material. We will then begin advanced weapons handling, taijutsu, genjutsu and ninjutsu training. Along with this we will start working on you harnessing and controlling your chakra. He stopped here as a hand was raised. Looking at the source he saw it was Naruto and for a second thought about ignoring it but thought better against it and allowed him to speak. Anyo-sensei, wouldn't it be better to work on harnessing our chakra earlier so that we would have better control of it later? Asked the blonde, speaking just loud enough to be heard. That's a good question, but the answer is no, spoke Iruka, honestly impressed with the boy's question. Seeing the questioning look on the boy's face, he decided to explain. We don't start working with chakra earlier because it has been found that chakra coils don't finish developing until 8 years after you are born. If you tried it any earlier, then you could damage your coils beyond repair and lose the ability to use chakra forever. Explained Iruka, making the boy pale and nod rapidly, silently vowing not to mess with it until then. Iruka noticed that several other people had the same reaction and all of them came from shinobi families. Alright, now for roll call. When I call your name, either raise your hand or say, "Here, Aburame Shino," spoke Iruka before he launched into role in the beginning of his career as a teacher. 7 years later. Naruto sighed as he looked up at the clouds from the roof of the academy. It was currently lunchtime and like always he came here for lunch. He often tried to avoid other people, mainly to avoid conflicts, since people seemed to always want to pick on him and most teachers would just look away. Throughout the years would-be bullies had come and gone, mostly going to see the nurse for broken bones. Originally he had simply ignored these would-be bullies and went on his way, or he avoided them completely. After he turned 7 though, they weren't having it and had started trying to jump on him. The first time he left with a black eye, broken nose and one hell of a stomach ache. This is mainly because he had thought that the teachers would help, to which he was proved wrong. Miho, upon hearing this, had simply told him to fight back and not let people walk over him. She had also told him not to try and seek out problems as well. The next time these would-be bullies tried, they were the ones to leave busted up. In front of the entire school and teachers he had made an example out of them. He had shown that compared to them he had superior speed, strength, and knowledge of the academy's basic taijutsu. At the time it was amazing what training hard for 2 years had done for him. After that the older students had started trying. Apparently they had got tired of just picking on his friend Lee and had tried to come after him. He had met Lee a week after he had started the academy. The black-haired boy had been trying to draw out his chakra at the time. Naruto, upon seeing this, had stopped him and informed him why they didn't want them doing that. Since then the two had been friends. Naruto had even given the boy the scroll containing the Heidenryu Kung Fu style. They would later come to find out that Lee suffered from a disease that wouldn't let him harness his chakra. Since then the boy had become determined to prove he could become a great shinobi with just taijutsu. In fact, the boy had even started training under a junin, the same one who was now the boy's junin instructor. Anyway, he guessed the bullies got tired of messing with Lee since they couldn't jump on him without worrying if the teachers would come after them. As such, they came after him. Naruto himself had simply smiled as he'd wanted Lee to beat these jerks up a while ago and shut them up. Once again, two bullies fell to Naruto's fist in front of the students and teachers sending and were then told to leave his friends alone or they would have another little chat. Another two had fallen when Naruto found them picking on a couple of girls from his class. It had only angered him more when he saw one of the girls was Sakura, as Miho had shown him a picture of her before. Putting them down had gotten him a lot of respect from the females around the school after he said guys should never hit girls unless they were sparring while simultaneously knocking them around. The girls Sakura had been with had been introduced as Ino and Hinata. Hinata, however, was the only one who he really talked to now. He had found out that Hinata's mother had died during the birth of her little sister. After this had happened, her father had all but abandoned her in favor of her little sister and never even spoke to her now without saying something negative towards her. This, however, had only been the tip of the proverbial iceberg. Apparently, the year before her mother died, her uncle was killed in her father's stead. Hinata had been kidnapped when she was 4 only for her father to kill the kidnapper. Hinata, however, had witnessed it and had actually grown to fear her family's fighting style after that, stating that she didn't want to kill anyone. In response to this, Naruto had told her that she didn't have to kill to use the style. He had went on to say that she still needed to learn it so that she could protect herself. Unfortunately, her father had already abandoned her training. As a result, Naruto had given her the scroll containing the Kikoken, spirit energy stirk, fighting style. That had been about a year ago, if not more. He had tried making friends with some of the boys from his class but had given up after the parents had found out. After that, he had thrown himself into his training hoping to better himself. He had also taken care to not stick out in the academy so as to not draw unwanted attention to himself. That, however, didn't mean he didn't crack jokes a lot, especially when people walked into them. This had actually been pretty easy. When given test, he would only answer half the questions and leave the others blank. The thing was, he only answered the harder questions to let people know he wasn't stupid and he just didn't care. While he had mastered the basics of the academy taijutsu style, he didn't show it as he always used the simplest things to deal with bullies. In fact, people originally thought he was simply strong and fast. He found he had the largest chakra amount in the academy's history. Hell, he had more than most junins could boast to, according to Sandame. As a result, however, he had horrible control, something he'd been trying to fix furiously. He was absolutely horrible at genjutsu though that could tie into his chakra control. He was one of the best in class in terms of ninjutsu, however. His usage of Kawarimi no Jutsu was the quickest in the class. His usage of the Nawanuke no Jutsu, rope escape technique, was also above average. Henge was a godsend for him and had become his most used jutsu as it allowed him to go shopping without getting glared at. He absolutely hated Bunshin no Jutsu, however. No matter what he tried to do, he would always produce sickly-looking clones even if he tried to make it a large amount of clones. If that wasn't bad enough, knowing his luck, they'd make that the jutsu for the genin exam. Over the years, his appearance had also changed. He now wore dark blue shinobi pants with bandages wrapped from the bottom to his sandals. He also wore a sleeveless blue shirt over a sleeveless black spandex shirt. On his wrist were 2 black wristbands that doubled as chakra weights. His hair was probably the only thing that stayed the same, short and spiky. On his left wrist was a bracelet made from prayer beads. He was broken from his thoughts by the sound of a bell ringing. Sighing and standing to his feet, he calmly headed back to class with his hands in his pocket. Upon reaching the class, he took his usual seat in the back and stayed quiet. The class quickly filled up, though it was noticeably smaller than when he first started. This was due to a combination of parents withdrawing their children due to his presence or students not being able to cut it as a shinobi. Not long later Iruka came in. Iruka had also changed a bit, mostly Haven grown taller though. No sooner had Iruka walked in that Naruto had put some earplugs in his ears. Just then Iruka engaged his infamous, big head no jutsu, and a resounding, "Shut the hell up," sounded through the class. Once he was finished the blonde calmly removed the earplugs with a smirk. "Alright class, now we'll begin the ninjutsu portion of the Genin exam, which will be the final portion. The jutsus needed to pass are Kawarimi, Henge, and Bunshin no Jutsu," spoke the scarred Chunin. He inwardly winced at that last one. He knew that Naruto wouldn't pass without being able to use that jutsu. Over the years he had learned a lot about the blonde as he became one of his favorite students. The boy was incredibly bright, as well as kind and funny. However, he was also tough as diamonds, which he had proved over the years. Like himself, Naruto was an orphan and depended mainly on himself. Unlike himself, though, the boy didn't act out or make a fool of himself to get attention. When he did have your attention, though, the boy was in complete control. He had also learned from his discussions with both the boy and Sandaime-sama that the boy was highly spiritual. This was probably something that had been rubbed off on him by Sandaime-sama. When he asked Naruto about this, he had told him that for him to survive his life, there was definitely some higher power at work that wanted him alive, or else he'd have died long ago. Shaking himself from his thoughts, he called for the first person to take the exam. 45 minutes later, Naruto was standing in front of Iruka and his assistant for the day, Mizuki. Once he was told to, he pulled of both Kawarimi and Henge, in which he transformed into Iruka, perfectly. It wasn't until he had to do the bunshin that he allowed the smirk to come across his face. Bringing his hands up and forming a cross with his index and middle fingers on both hands, he spoke the name of his technique. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Both Iruka and Mizuki had dropped jaws upon hearing the name of the technique used by the academy student. There was a puff of smoke that cleared to show not 3 but 5 solid clones of the blonde, each one grinning foxily. "BB how?" mumbled Iruka in shock. "Remember how I was having trouble performing Bunshin no Jutsu, sensei?" spoke the blonde, getting a nod from the scarred Chunin. "Well, I talked to Sarutobi Oji-san about it. He told me I just have way too much chakra to create a bunshin without overloading it. Long story short, he taught me Kage Bunshin to make up for it," finished the boy, still grinning. Iruka smiled at that. If there was one thing Naruto liked doing, it was surprising people. That much he could tell by the grin that took up his face every time he did it, as if he had planned for it to go that way. Shaking himself from his thoughts, he handed the boy one of the hitae from the table, stating that he passed. While both of them were smiling, Mizuki was scowling. His plan had just been ruined, as he had wanted to use the boy knowing he couldn't create a bunshin. Now, however, it looked like he'd have to do it himself and risk getting caught. Joy. That night found Naruto in the forest surrounding the village. He had been out here since he'd been dismissed from the academy. He had noticed the glares he got from most of the parents upon seeing him wearing a hitae. He also noticed how everyone smiled seeing the Uchiha Teme wearing one. If it was one person he couldn't stand, it was Uchiha Sasuke. In fact, if it wasn't for Sakura, he would have beaten the hell out of the boy a long time ago. However, because Sakura was his friend and Miho's niece, he'd given the arrogant bastard a pass, something that he had done against his better judgment. Ever since the Uchiha massacre 5 years ago, Sasuke has been a complete emo. The boy was always brooding in some little corner or running from his fangirls. The latter of the two he couldn't understand, as he was quite sure he himself would enjoy the attention from the girls. In fact, he had a few ideas for some of them that would no doubt be found within the pages of any book of the Icha series. His thoughts were broken, however, as he was forced to dodge a shuriken that nearly hit him in the head. Looking around from behind a tree, he spotted something quite surprising. There just beneath him were Iruka and Mizuki fighting, and more surprisingly was that the forbidden scroll of seals, The very scroll from which he learned Kage Bunshin from was lying on the ground behind Mizuki, instead of wherever the hell Sandame usually keeps it. "How dare you steal the forbidden scroll?" yelled Iruka while throwing a kunai at Mizuki. That was all Naruto needed to hear before making a move. Moving through the trees, he circled until he was behind Mizuki and quickly snatched up the scroll. While he was turning to leave, something else caught his attention. "I can't believe you framed one of my students," yelled Iruka before punching the traitorous Chunin in the jaw. Mizuki staggered back for a moment and spat out blood. "A student, ha? That boy is a monster, or have you forgotten that?" spat Mizuki. "Naruto is a lot of things, but he is not a monster," spoke Iruka. Before Mizuki could say anything, the sound of branches cracking caught their attention. Looking over, they both saw one Uzumaki Naruto glaring daggers at Mizuki, walking towards him menacingly, the scroll of seals strapped on his back. "See, look at his eyes, Iruka, those are the eyes of a monster," spoke Mizuki with a grin. "Call me another monster and you'll wish you were never born," spoke the blonde coldly. "Why not? It's what you are, or have you forgotten?" said Mizuki, still grinning. "If so, let me refresh your memory," he said, ignoring Iruka's yelling for him to shut the hell up. 12 years ago, a demon, the Kyuubi no Kitsune, attacked this village. That demon killed anyone he crossed. Finally, the Yondaime came and sealed the demon within the body of a newborn child. That child was you, Naruto," said Mizuki with a smirk, seeing the boy freeze in his tracks. "That is why everyone hates you. Why even Iruka hates you. During your rampage, you even killed Iruka's parents." He would have continued, but he suddenly found himself cut off from the oxygen he needed to breathe. Iruka blinked, seeing Naruto with his fist thrust into Mizuki's stomach. He hadn't even seen the boy move. "You talk too much," spat the boy coldly, his blue eyes turning to slits. "I have known about the Kyuubi's sealing since I was 5 years old, Baka," said the boy, removing his fist from the Chunin's stomach only to send him flying with a punch to the jaw. "However, you seem to be confusing the jailer with the jailed," continued the blonde while staring at the Chunin that was struggling to bring himself to his feet. He stopped here and took the scroll off of him before tossing it over to the stunned Iruka. Catching the scroll, Iruka was shocked to see Mizuki cough up blood. Knowing Sarutobi Oji-san, he's probably watching this and has already sent the Anbu this way. Not only that, but with me being out here this long, my own Anbu guard should be on the way, as I never stay out this late," said the blonde before turning back to Mizuki, who was now standing wide-eyed in fear. "Since that's the case, I should hurry up and kick here before they get here and beat me to it," finished the blonde. Mizuki, hearing this, charged for the blonde but was not prepared for the boy to suddenly disappear. The only warning he got before the pain came was a cry of "Shoryuken," rising dragon punch, before he felt the fist of the massive uppercut to the chest. Hokage Tower. Sarutobi was indeed watching, using the standard crystal ball given to every Kage upon gaining the office. He had been fearing the worst when Mizuki spoke up about Kyuubi. He had been stunned into silence, however, when Naruto acted and punched the Chunin in the stomach during his little speech. Upon listening to Naruto speak, he was first surprised that 1. He already knew about the Kyuubi. 2. The boy hadn't told him he knew, though with the law in place it would be quite easy to feign ignorance. 3. The boy knew him so well he already knew he had the Anbu that way, along with his own personal guards coming. He had also been surprised when he saw the boy's eyes change slightly. More surprising was that the fox wasn't influencing the boy at all. The kicker, though, was the uppercut delivered to Mizuki's chin. "Damn, that has got to hurt. If I didn't know better, I'd think that was Kushina that hit him," thought Sarutobi with a shudder. "Minato-kun, you would definitely be pleased with Naruto-kun if you were here now," thought Sarutobi with a smile. Was a bright day in Konoha. Even as early as it was, the people of the village were already going about their day. Naruto himself was currently making his way towards the academy, though sluggishly. He had foregone training this morning, instead opting to sleep in a bit as he had been up late the previous night. The Anbu had arrived last night to find roughly 10 Naruto clones knocking Mizuki around the clearing like a pinball. Naruto himself had only hit the bastard about 4 times the entire night. Hell, he could have knocked him out with the Shoryuken but held it back just because the traitor had framed him. After that, he had been escorted to Sandame's office to explain not only why he'd been in the area at that time, but how he had learned about Kyuubi. After this, Sarutobi had wanted to know why the blonde hadn't told him he knew, to which the blonde had stated, "You didn't tell me, so why should I tell you?" He had also learned that he would no longer be under Anbu guard, as assaulting a shinobi was treason. After that, the old man had finally allowed him to go home. It was during this time that Iruka had chosen to speak up, thanking him for the help with Mizuki. More importantly, in his mind, the man had acknowledged him as his own person and not the Kyuubi. Once that was done, they had gone their separate ways, Naruto shadowed by an Anbu guard just to make sure he got home. This leads us to where he was now half asleep, walking towards the academy. It was only when his sleep-clouded mind registered the scent of Ichiraku's ramen that the boy stopped looking so much like the Walking Dead. 20 minutes later, he emerged from the stand officially awake and continued towards his destination by rooftop. Hokage Tower. In the center of the Hokage Tower, in a room that is usually reserved for meetings with the council, sat 8 Junins of Konohagakure no Sato. Along with them sat the clan heads for the Hyuga, Yamanaka, Inazuka, Nara, Akamichi, and Aburame clans. As if that wasn't enough, then along with them stood 4 Anbu members, each having served as the personal guards of the newly instated genin Uzumaki Naruto. The reason for their presence was a simple one. Should the chosen sensei of Naruto's team hold a grudge against him because of the Kyuubi, one of the members would be chosen as the team's Junin sensei. The favorite for this position was the current captain of the team. In the center of them all sat the Sandame Hokage, Sarutobi Izorin. He himself was lost in thought concerning a certain blonde. He was not so ignorant to not be aware of what Naruto had been doing for the past 7 years. In fact, he had known from the very first night that Naruto had taken possession of the Scroll of Lost Arts. That, however, was not what was worrying the old cage. In fact, it was Naruto's behavior last night that had shocked him. Naruto had always been a cheerful person, despite the fact that he had very little to be cheerful for. He was also a very serious and quiet person when not around those he knew and trusted. It was for this reason that his Anbu guard hadn't changed since the boy was 4 years old. After the assassination attempt by a former guard, the blonde had been very weary of people he didn't know. When he had changed the team guarding him, he had personally introduced the boy to the new team and personally vouched for them. From that time, the only time they weren't watching him was when the boy went to train. If it was that time, the guard would wait near the path he would take from the Hokage training ground. He did it this way for the simple fact that no one but himself or Naruto could enter those grounds now, lest they set off several alarms whilst simultaneously summoning a team of Anbu. So it was no surprise that he knew of every incident in the blonde's life. His thoughts on the matter were interrupted when there was a puff of smoke within the room. Once the smoke cleared, everyone was greeted to the sight of one very late Junin sitting in his seat. Well, now that Kakashi has finally graced us with his presence, we can finally begin the meeting. Even if we're starting an hour late, said Sarutobi, his sarcastic voice turning to one of slight anger. Now, normally I wouldn't summon the clan heads just for team assignments. In fact, I would have just let Iruka pick the teams, however this time is different, said the Sandame, catching the attention of all in the room. I think we all know that Konoha has not fully recovered from the last great Shinobi War. Of course, certain events since then have not helped matters either. It also doesn't help that we have had less students attending the academy each year. The fact that a new village has recently been founded, as well as the growing numbers of Iwa and Kumo, also don't fare well for us. He paused here and let everyone absorb that bit of information. It is for this reason that I believe this generation of shinobi will be most important for us. The fact that 9 of them have more potential than the rest of their class hasn't escaped my notice either. If you look at your sheets, you will see just who those people are. However, I will spare you the boring reading and simply tell you of them as well as their strengths, weaknesses, and anything else that needs to be known. He stopped here, lighting his pipe and taking a long drag from it. Exhaling after the short speech, he continued. These 9 students are the ones with the highest probability of becoming Konoha Shinobi. If they do, I want them ready to take the upcoming Chunin exams. Meaning you have 6 months to make them all Chunin level. So this is how the teams will be.
Academy. Iruka looked upon the newly instated genin for what could be the last time for many of them. Pride shined in his eyes for those that he just knew would become certified genin by the end of the week. He had just given the speech that he had written just for this very occasion.
After one last look around the room and seeing the smiling faces of his students, he glanced down at his clipboard. He had just gotten the team assignments an hour ago from Sandaime-sama by way of a genin team. He had made the list of team assignments yesterday after the genin exams. As is tradition, he had delivered the list to Sandaime-sama for his approval and any changes he felt would need to be made.
While naming off the first 6 teams, he couldn't help but chuckle at the varying reactions from the newly found genins. They ranged from not being on Sasuke-kun's team from the girls to not being on teams with that bad Naruto from both the boys and girls. He supposed that was to be expected, though Sasuke and Naruto were the strongest genin in class. While this was going on, Naruto himself was praying to every higher power he knew of that he wasn't put with the emo or one of his fangirls. He had no idea how teams were chosen, but he knew if they wanted an assault team, then he'd end up with the TEM. He ignored Kyuubi's sadistic laughter at his situation.
Team 7: Inuzuka Kiba, Haruno Sakura, and Uchiha Sasuke. Your Junin instructor is Hitaki Kakashi. Spoke Iruka, breaking the blonde from his thoughts and thanking everyone that heard and answered his prayers.
Council chambers. Inuzuka Kiba is loud, brash, and far too overconfident for his own good. If his affinity is anything like his personality, he is definitely a lightning type. He knows 3 of the academy jutsus. Like all Inuzukas, he is very protective of his dog. He has no genjutsu to speak of, but is proficient in his clan's ninjutsu and taijutsu. Next is Haruno Sakura. Out of the 9, she is certainly the weakest. She is incredibly smart and her taijutsu is straight out of the textbook. She has no jutsu besides the 4 academy jutsu, however her strength when angered is phenomenal and is the perfect genjutsu type. She is the classic fangirl and a rabid one at that. She is also very easy to influence as she likes to follow the crowd. However, within the academy everyone knows she is not to be trifled with, as she is under Uzumaki Naruto's protection and has been for over 5 years. Aside from that, she delivers a right hook that would make Tsunade proud, so watch out for that, Kakashi. He stopped here, letting everyone absorb that and taking a puff from his pipe.
Next is Uchiha Sasuke. He is the typical Uchiha, meaning he's arrogant and believes himself superior to all others.
Since the Uchiha massacre, he has become withdrawn and obsessed with revenge. He is the number 1 rookie and has an impressive amount of chakra for a genin. He uses the classic Uchiha taijutsu and mastered all 4 academy-taught jutsus. His genjutsu is non-existent and his Sharingan is still inactive. He stopped here with a muttered, "Thank Kami," that all the clan heads heard, making them smirk. Aside from that, he is mentally unstable, though it is not enough to do harm to himself. Still, he has been having sessions with Inoichi every 2 weeks since the massacre. I wouldn't put it past him to abandon the leaf should a quicker way to power show itself. So that is something you would also have to watch out for, Kakashi.
Academy. Team 8: Uzumaki Naruto, Hyuga Hinata, and Aburame Shino. Your Junin instructor is Yuhi Kurane. Naruto grinned at that. Hinata was his best friend and Shino, well, he was Shino. Still, somehow he knew this could work and would most definitely be for the best.
Council chambers. Aburame Shino. His taijutsu is non-existent with the exception of his knowledge of the Academy taijutsu. He knows 3 of the 4 jutsus from the Academy. Aside from that, his ninjutsu and genjutsu is non-existent. His Kikai bugs give him little chakra to perform ninjutsu but make him virtually invulnerable to genjutsu. Rumor has it that he is also a clan prodigy. He stopped here letting everyone absorb that bit of information.
Also, he is possibly the best person to have on Naruto's team. He is intelligent and always level-headed, which would make him a perfect leader if he would speak up more. Also, I believe he would also be able to sympathize with Naruto if he learns of the boy's situation should it ever be necessary.
Hyuga Hinata is the top kunoichi of her class. While kind and shy by nature, she is quite fierce when angered. She is also very protective of her friends and those she cares for. Her taijutsu is superb with the combined might of her Byakugan, and her knowledge of Juken is limited as it is.
She is also the confidant of Uzumaki Naruto and one of the few people to have his full trust. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if she already had knowledge of the Kyuubi. It must also be noticed that he is extremely protective of her.
Anyway, in terms of taijutsu, she is the second strongest of her class, having only lost once, and that was only because her opponent has superior speed. Her genjutsu and ninjutsu is non-existent, however, with the exception of the Academy jutsus. She is most likely a water type in terms of elemental affinity. Also, she has lately begun questioning the circumstances of her mother's death.
He stopped here, sending a look towards the stoic Hyuga head, who was successfully hiding his surprise of his supposedly weak daughter's strength. Uzumaki Naruto is incredibly bright and can tell enemy from ally at first meeting most times.
He trusts very few people but is completely loyal to those he does trust. He is the strongest of his class, his taijutsu being unmatched. According to Iruka, he has managed to defeat every opponent with the exception of Hinata with basic Academy taijutsu. In fact, she is the only one to have forced him to use advanced taijutsu skills. I have never actually seen him train, but judging from what I witnessed last night, taijutsu-wise he can at least match anyone up to low Chunin level. His genjutsu, however, is non-existent. He knows 3 of the Academy taught jutsus and Kage Bunshin, which he managed to learn in one night. He paused here, hearing the surprised gasp from several people. From the time of his birth he has had approximately 1,557 assassination attempts. This includes one attempt by a former member of Kiri's 7 Swordsmen as well as a former Anbu member of this village. As a result of this, he trusts very few people within this village. This is something that must be fixed to restore his faith in this village and its people. He finished seriously.
Damn, and I thought the Uchiha was up, muttered Kakashi quietly, though everyone heard him. Academy. Team 9 is still in circulation from last year, so we won't have one. Team 10 will consist of Nara Shikamaru, Yamanaka Ino and Akamichi Choji. Your Junin instructor is Sarutobi Asuma, said Iruka, completely ignoring Ino's loud complaints before moving on. Council Chambers. Akamichi Choji has raw strength for a genin that is quite impressive. However, his speed leaves much to be desired. He knows 3 of the Academy jutsus. Along with that, he is also quite efficient at his clan's ninjutsu. Unfortunately, he'd rather spend his time eating than training, and he has no taijutsu besides the Academy taught style. He is, however, very loyal and protective of his friends, as is evidenced by his friendship with Nara Shikamaru. If he is as much like his father as I believe he has a Doden elemental affinity. He paused here, taking another drag from his pipe before continuing.
Nara Shikamaru is the best friend of Akamichi Choji. Rumor has it that Shikamaru is in fact a closet genius. He knows all 4 of the Academy taught jutsus. His taijutsu is non-existent, as is his genjutsu. He is, however, like Choji, quite efficient at his clan's ninjutsu. He is the complete opposite of Choji, favoring speed over strength. Unfortunately, he is also very lazy and would rather spend his time watching clouds or sleeping than training.
Next is Yamanaka Ino. Having grown up with Shikamaru and Choji, she is seen by them as their bossy and annoying sister. Out of the new graduates, she is the second-ranked kunoichi. She knows all 4 academy jutsus and is quite proficient with her clan's ninjutsu. Unfortunately, she'd rather spend her time gossiping and shopping than training. Along with that, somewhere along the line she has also become a rabid fangirl. She is also the perfect genjutsu type and has no taijutsu to speak of. He stopped here, sending a questioning look at the Yamanaka clan head, who simply nodded in response.
Academy. As soon as Iruka finished with the team assignments, he looked up to find Naruto already standing with the window open. Naruto had never been one to use the halls, opting instead to use the window to get outside and avoid unnecessary conflicts. Telling the students to report back in 1 hour, he was not surprised to hear the window close as soon as he finished speaking.
Smiling, he turned and headed for the door himself. He had 30 minutes until he had to be back from lunch. This meant he had 20 minutes to spend at Ichiraku's with Naruto. Later, 1 hour and 30 minutes later, found Naruto walking back into the class. Upon entering, he saw only 2 teams remaining, those being his own and Sasuke Tami's. "Sorry I'm late, I fell asleep," said the blonde towards who he assumed to be his sensei. She had long wavy black hair and a pair of exotic red eyes. Her dress was quite unique, looking to be made of bandages, and a red shirt could be seen covering her chest. The dress stopped short, though, giving a nice view of her legs. "That's all right, just don't let it happen again," spoke the woman, getting a nod from the blonde. "Right, well, let's head up to the roof," spoke the woman before turning and walking out of the room. The genin said nothing and followed her silently, completely forgetting about Team 7, who would still be there 3 hours from now. Once the group made it to the roof, they ended up sitting by a group of tables. Naruto himself simply sat down, staring out at the Hokage monument. He frowned at the sight of it. He had made plans to paint it, but as payment for the old man to let him learn Kage Bunshin, he had to go 6 months without a single prank. He only did a prank every 2 weeks, and the monument was supposed to be his final prank and his legacy. Now you may be wondering why he would spend time pranking villagers and shinobi when he could be training. The answer is actually quite simple. There is no better training than outrunning a group of chunin and junin. It helps with your speed, stealth, and stamina. Well, let's get to know each other, shall we? I'll start first. My name is Yuhi Kurane. My likes are genjutsu and sweets. My dislikes are perverts. As far as dreams, well, right now just making sure you guys become great shinobi. Now you next, finished the red-eyed junin, pointing towards Shino. My name is Aburame Shino. My likes are collecting bugs to interbreed into my clan's colony. My dislikes are people who disrespect bugs. My dream is to become a decent clan head. Finished Shino in the monologue his clan is known for. My name is Hyuga Hanada. My likes are my friends, pressing flowers, and making medical creams. I have a few dislikes, though they'll have to remain nameless. My dream. She stopped here and blushed while sneaking a glance towards Naruto, who at the moment was staring out at the monument. Your turn, Blondie, said Kurane, breaking the boy from his thoughts. Naruto stayed silent for a moment, going over everything that was said before speaking his piece. My name is Uzumaki Naruto. My likes are training and those important to me. My dislikes are idiotic bastards that judge people before they get to know them. Other than that, I hate assassins, the council, and foxes. My dream is to find a reason for my existence, finished the blonde quietly. Right, well, that's all for today. Meet me at training ground 8 and 7 tomorrow morning for your exam. Just so you know, only 9 of the 27 graduates actually become genin. Everyone else goes back to the academy. You have a 66.6% chance at passing and continuing on to become actual genins. With that said, the black-haired junin disappeared in a poof of smoke. The next morning found the 3 members of Team 8 sitting under a tree in their assigned training grounds. It was still early, but everyone could tell it would be especially hot today. Hinata herself was seriously debating whether or not to keep her jacket on. The same could be said for Shino. In fact, the only one who didn't seem affected by the heat was Naruto. That, however, was only because being Kyuubi's container gave him immunity to fire. Alright guys, we're going to play a little game. The results of the game will determine whether you pass or fail, said Kurenai, pausing to let them absorb that before continuing. So here's the deal. For the next 2 hours we'll be playing hide and seek Shinobi style. All you have to do is avoid being caught, said the red-eyed Junin. Okay, what's the catch? Asked Naruto with narrowed eyes. The catch is you have to do it together. Meaning if one person is caught you all fail. Like I said, we're doing this ninja style so you can use jutsu as long as they're not destructive. The entire village is usable as a field, but you're only safe when time runs out. You have until 9, go. The sounds of smacking flesh sounded throughout the training grounds of the Hidden Leaf village. It was still very early, so much so that even the sun itself was just starting to peek over the horizon. Regardless of this, however, 2 boys could be seen pounding away at each other in training ground number 9. The first boy was garbed in only a pair of green shinobi-style pants. A pair of blue shinobi sandals covered his feet, while a Konoha Hite acted as a belt for his pants. White bandages covered the entire length of his arms. Short black hair adorned the top of his head as sweat dripped down his forehead. The boy looked to be only about 13 years old despite the muscles covering his arms or his well-defined six-pack abs. He looks like Fei Long in Street Fighter 2V. This boy was none other than Konoha's green beast, Rock Lee, though one might never know when comparing him to his past self. Gone were the ponytail and bushy eyebrows he had donned during his early years as an academy student. In its place was one of Konoha's strongest genin. He had narrowly avoided becoming Guy's clone thanks to timely interference from Naruto. The blonde, wanting to spare everyone from another Guy, had stated that in order for Lee to be known as Rock Lee instead of Mini Guy, then he must create an image for himself. While it had worked to some extent, Guy had still managed to rub some of his quirks off on his longtime apprentice, but that's a story for another time. Across from him stood one Uzumaki Naruto. Today he had chosen a dark gray training gi. The robe was held together by a blue belt. A black spandex shirt was worn underneath his robe. He wore his prayer beads on his left wrist and his hite tied securely around his forehead. His gi was soaked with sweat and he panted heavily, exhausted by today's sparring session. Naruto-kun, your flames of youth burn brightly as always, but I will still win. Yosh! Screamed Lee, making the blonde genin cringe at the volume. Immediately after this declaration, Lee shot forward. However, instead of using the signature spin kick his teammates always saw from him, the black-haired boy lashed out with a fist. Naruto, seeing it coming, blocked it as well as the 2 punches that followed behind it. Grabbing onto the other boy's wrist after the last punch, the blonde quickly tossed the black-haired boy over his shoulder. Lee quickly recovered and, nearing the ground, planted his right hand to the ground. Using it to flip himself, he sprung back up before landing on his feet. However, before either of them could charge the other, both boys saw the sun come up and groaned. So same time tomorrow? Asked Lee as he moved to grab his things. I'll let you know. Kurenai-sensei's been talking about getting us AC rank, so I don't know yet, replied Naruto, wiping the sweat from himself with a towel. Lee nodded at that before putting on the green vest he'd left sitting on top of his bag. Once done, he grabbed his things and left with a wave. Naruto smirked seeing this before heading towards home for a quick shower and then breakfast. Hyuga Estate. At the same time, Hyuga Hinata was just finishing her own morning training. Unlike Naruto and Lee, she didn't have the freedom to come and go as she pleased. She was the heiress to Konoha's most powerful and noble clan. As such, she had a limited amount of movement. This was especially true since her attempted kidnapping. Luckily, no one but the guards and cook were ever up this early. Even if someone was up, however, usage of the Byakugan was forbidden within the compound unless you were in the training areas. This gave her just enough freedom for her morning workouts. She of course trained in the gardens, which were a good distance from the clan's training areas. Her training outfit consisted of red pants with flat-footed black shoes. She also wore a sleeveless red Chinese-styled top with a blue sash tied around her waist. She wore blue wristbands on each wrist, and her hair, which she'd allowed to grow long, was tied back into a ponytail which stopped at her mid-back and was held together by her hite tae. Coming out of a combo of quick kicks, she spun before flipping onto her hands and spinning with her legs spread wide to her sides. Coming out of the spin, she pushed off the ground and flipped into yet another kick in mid-air before landing and settling back into her stance. Not even stopping to catch her breath, she sent out a combo of Jayuken strikes to her imaginary enemy. Sweat flew off her unmarred forehead as she continued to take her frustrations out on her imaginary enemy, who to her eyes resembled either Cloud Nens or the Hyuga's elder council.
Finally, she ceased her barrage of attacks and glanced up at the sky. After determining the time, she headed off towards her room for a change of clothes and a shower before meeting her team. Moving quickly, she missed the visage of her shocked father, who had seen the last 15 minutes of her training.
Yamanaka compound. Elsewhere, Yamanaka Ino was just finishing her own training and she was not happy. For the last 6 weeks her mother had been running her ragged. It had started just after she had had her first team meeting. Her father had come home to talk to her mother. Ino had no idea what was said, but she definitely knew that her daily early morning torture sessions were a result of the discussion. She wasn't the only one, however, as Choji had also recently started work with his family taijutsu. While she had no idea what type of style the Akamichi clan used, she knew it was something, as it was no longer uncommon for Choji to show up to the team meetings too tired to even eat his chips. Though he still did it, even if he did it slowly.
In fact, as far as she knew, Shikamaru was the only one who wasn't doing some kind of taijutsu training with his family now. This was a shock to her, since for as long as she could remember, she, Choji, and Shikamaru had always started training anything at the exact same time. Regardless of this, though, Asuma-sensei was now teaching the lazy Nara how to use trench knives, which Ino was thankful for, as it made the lazy bum do some work.
Training ground number 8. Naruto arrived at his team's training ground, finding he was the last to arrive, as usual. He was always the last to arrive since he had to change into his mission clothes after his morning training. That didn't bother him, however, since Shino and Hinata were early for everything. Nodding towards his teammates, the blonde sat back against a training log and rested his eyes. Not long after that, Kurane arrived in her usual whirl of leaves compliments of the Shunshin no Jutsu. After doing their warm-ups, which consisted of different types of stretches, Team 8 headed towards the tower. Along the way, Naruto ignored the cold looks given to him by the villagers. He had grown used to it over the years. Kurane, however, was still surprised at this, knowing Naruto had put up with the glares and weak killing intent from the villagers all his life. Upon reaching the tower, the group headed straight to Mission Central. Mission Central was a room 1 floor beneath the Hokage's office. The room had one large desk where the Sandaime and his assistants sorted through the mission's assignments. It also held several filing cabinets where unassigned missions were stored. The filing cabinets were each lined up along the back wall, each holding a certain class of missions ranging from D ranked on the far left to S rank on the far right. This floor also held the council chambers, where the members of the council and Sandaime held their meetings. The place, in Naruto's opinion, is where the most evil of Konoha's citizens gathered to plot his death. If Sandaime knew the blonde's thoughts, he'd be surprised about how accurate the boy was in his guess. Team 8 early as always is C, spoke Sandaime, breaking the blonde from his thoughts. Looking towards the team's mission folder, a smile graced his old features. Unlike Kakashi and his lazy son Asuma, Kurane had been taking her job seriously. Her team came in early every day and did no less than 3D rank missions before heading off for team training. The results of this had paid off well, as her team had over 40 D ranks done within their first 3 weeks together. Alright Kurane, seeing as you team is over the limit of required D ranks, I'll give you a choice. You could either take a D rank to further improve your group's teamwork, or you guys could take your first C rank, spoke the old man. We'll take the C rank, Hokage-sama, spoke Kurane quickly. Sarutobi wasn't surprised by her choice. Any Junin would begin to go stir crazy after being in the village for 6 weeks. He didn't even need to take Naruto into account, who, as much as he tried to hide it, was practically dying to get out of the village and away from the glares. He had noticed that the blonde had spent a large amount of time outside of the village since he had become a genin. If he was in the village, he stuck to the rooftops, if not with his team. That thought put a frown on the old Hokage's face. At this rate, Naruto would leave the village the first chance he got. That, however, would most likely be when he died, as he knew the blonde held very little attachment to the village or its people. Shaking himself from his thoughts on that matter, he began looking through mission folders. After a few minutes of reading through and ruling out missions, he finally came to one he liked. It seems the capital is having bandit problems. Apparently the bandits have been attacking under the cover of night at least once a week. You and your team are to head there and put a stop to it. Kurane nodded at this, accepting the mission as well as the scroll containing the details of it. Once done, she turned to her team, giving them an hour to pack up before meeting her at the gates. An hour later found Team 8 gathered together at the gates. After a quick equipment check by Kurane and a check-in with the guards, the group walked out of the gates. The trip had been made in silence as the group moved towards the capital. Along the way, Naruto had been forced to shed his GI top, leaving him in the black spandex shirt. This action had not gone unnoticed by Kurane and Hinata, the latter of the two almost tripping from the branch she was about to jump from. Shino himself smiled inwardly, as the coats his clan were known for wearing had chakra circulating the inner area, allowing for them to keep cool. After about another hour of travel, they stopped as they came to a bridge. It was then Naruto saw the reason Fire Country was named as it was: the two volcanoes on either side of the bridge. Luckily they were far enough away from the bridge for them not to worry about. 20 minutes later found the group staring down at the capital city of Fire Country, Suzuki. The capital looked to be at least twice the size of Konoha, much to the shock of the genin. After the genin got over their shock, Kurane led them to their hotel and then to the office of the city's leader, the mayor. The mayor's office was much like that of the Sandame's. In fact, the main thing they found different was that this office had a single door to enter from instead of the two large double doors. Hell, the office even held pictures of each of the Hokages in their prime. "Welcome to Suzuki City," spoke the man behind the desk, breaking the blonde from his thoughts. Since the man was sitting, Naruto couldn't tell much about him. What he could see though was that the man was muscular, as that could be seen through his dress shirt. His hair was cut short in an even cut. His skin was well tanned, most likely due to his time staying within the capital. "It's good to see you again, Blanca-sama," said Kurane with a small bow. "It is good to see you as well, Yuhi-san," replied the man known as Blanca. "You're Blanca Katashi, correct?" spoke Naruto quietly, a thoughtful look upon his face. "Hi. I'm surprised one as young as yourself knows of me," spoke the man. "Most of my childhood was spent within the library. It's an honor to meet the man said to be on the same level as the Yondaime," said Naruto. "The honor is mine, Uzumaki Naruto-san," said Blanca, much to the blonde's shock. "Don't be surprised, I'm from Konoha after all and I visit regularly. Sarutobi-sama speaks quite highly of you," explained the man, getting a sigh of relief from the boy. "Well, now why don't you guys go look around town while I have a word with your sensei?" said Blanca, who got a nod from Kurane. Seeing this, the genin each gave a nod before turning and walking out of the door. Once out the door, both Shino and Hinata rounded on the blonde, who answered the unasked question.
That was Blanca Katashi, the Yondaime's teammate. Unlike Yondaime, who specialized in fuinjutsu and ninjutsu, he specialized in explosives and fuinjutsu. His team was favored to become the next Sannin until they each went their separate ways. explained Naruto, getting nods from the two who filed that tidbit of information away for later. A few minutes later found Shino walking away from his teammates, leaving Naruto and Hinata alone. Hinata blushed faintly once they were left alone. While they had spent more time together, she was still the same when around her crush.
"So you want to go get something to eat?" asked the blonde.
Hinata went to answer when her stomach beat her to it. Blushing a deep shade of red, she buried her head into his shoulder as they walked towards the nearest restaurant. As they walked, Naruto couldn't help but notice something. That something was the lack of glares, curses, and killing intent that he usually received within the village. It was as he noticed this that he allowed a small smile to come across his face as he laced his fingers with Hinata's. Hinata herself smiled at the gesture, knowing what it meant. They were in a place where no one knew them and held any expectations of them. Right now she wasn't the Hyuga heiress and Naruto wasn't the demon spawn. Right now she was just Hinata and he was just Naruto, and right now she couldn't be happier. Well, she could, but she quickly stomped those thoughts out, along with the blush that came with them.
3 days later, Naruto sighed as he sat in his spot in the trees. He was currently a mile away from the capital on the eastern side. According to the information Kurane-sensei had gotten, the bandits always came from the eastern side of the village, always around midnight. According to Blanca-sama, there were only 20 of them that came, but he wasn't sure who the leader was. He did, however, say that this leader apparently had some shinobi training, judging from the reports given. Kurane had stated that the guy was probably just some punk who couldn't make it through the academy, as all he ever used were kunai and shuriken. It was either that or he was smart enough not to use jutsu that could link him back to his home village. It was most likely the latter of the two. Shaking himself from his thoughts, he looked up just in time to see the group of bandits coming down over the hill. He smirked at the sight, sending a single clink into his headpiece, the signal to start the first phase of their operation. Shino, who was positioned in the trees several feet behind Naruto, immediately released his bugs, hearing the sound. Naruto watched as the bugs crawled along the ground, taking positions in trees, bushes and on rocks. A smirk crossed his face at the benefits of having an Aburame on his team played across his mind. Whoever had thought up the idea of using bugs as weapons had indeed been a genius. Shaking this thought from his mind, he sent 2 consecutive clicks into the headpiece. Kurane, who was positioned in the highest branches of her own tree, immediately ran through a series of seals. After finishing the seals, she quickly layered the subtle genjutsu on the surrounding area. Once the bandits step into it, they'd basically be traveling in circles while thinking they were getting closer to the town. This would be the only part she'd play unless things escalated beyond the control of the genin. This would also allow her to see just how much the 3 had grown under her command. She was a bit disappointed, though, that none of her students could use genjutsu. Shino's Kakai bugs ate up all his spare chakra. Hinata, as a Hyuga, used nothing but taijutsu, though she at least wanted to learn more. Finally, there was Naruto, whose horrible chakra control prevented him from doing anything more than dispelling genjutsus. While his control was good for your average genin, Naruto wasn't average in the fact that his chakra level could compare to the Sandame's. As such, genjutsu was out of the question for him. She absent-mindedly sent a few clicks into her earpiece while thinking about her current situation. She sighed idly, wondering if she should find herself an apprentice. Hinata, who was perched within a tree near her teammates, silently counted the number of bandits with the usage of her Byakugan. Focusing a bit more chakra into her eyes, the girl added in the back of the group. Once she confirmed the number, she sent a few clicks into her earpiece before jumping to the ground. Something was wrong. That was the thought going through the mind of the bandit leader. They had been walking for a while now, and he knew they should have reached the city by now. It had grown quite not too long ago, too quiet for a forest. He bit his lip in thought, enough to break skin. Almost as soon as he did, the illusion around him shimmered before breaking.
His eyes widened at that and he ducked, barely dodging the punch that was aimed at his jaw. He quickly jumped backwards, creating some distance while dispelling the genjutsu around the area. Looking around, he knew immediately this was a Konoha Genin team just from the sight of the Hyuga and the Aburame. The question was, however, where was the third teammate and the Junin? His question was answered when he felt himself get kicked in the back. Naruto watched as the man flew towards a tree only to flip himself and land on his feet. He smirked when he saw the man's eyes narrow behind his mask when he saw the two thugs behind him had been knocked out. His eyes narrowed hearing the man chuckle before it turned into full-blown laughter.
"Oh, this is great. They sent the Kyuubi brat," spoke the man, though his voice alone was enough to grate on the blonde's nerves. "On top of that they sent the Hyuga. I guess I could take her to Kumo and get me a nice reward." Anything further was cut off as he blocked a punch to his chest, the force of which was enough to send him skidding back. "Shouldn't you be rotting in a cell right now, Mizuki Teme?" said the blonde, spitting the name out like venom. The man laughed before pulling the mask down, exposing his face. Next he pulled up the top part of the bandana he was wearing, exposing the slashed leaf symbol. "I won't have to worry about that now. Once I kill you I can go back and they'd treat me like a hero." Of course the blame for the heirs of the Hyuga and Aburame clans would fall on you for finally showing your true colors. He barely even finished his sentence before he found himself being sent flying from a strong kick to the stomach. Naruto watched him fly before he slammed into a tree. Mizuki got up and spit a bit of blood from his mouth before looking into the slitted eyes of Konoha's resident foxboy. Quickly pulling a scroll from one of his many pockets, he quickly opened it, causing for a puff of smoke to cloud the blonde's vision. The smoke hadn't even cleared before a large shuriken came flying towards him. Seeing it coming, the blonde genin quickly stepped to the side. He looked up just in time to see Mizuki descending on him with another giant shuriken spinning in his right hand. Naruto quickly stepped to the side, catching the nuke nin by his shirt and upper right arm before tossing him over his shoulder. Mizuki recovered quickly, however, and flipped in the air while throwing the shuriken at the blonde. Mizuki landed on his feet and watched in satisfaction as the shuriken flew towards the blonde's face. Naruto simply watched it come at him before he snatched it out of the air and sent it right back at his former teacher. Mizuki, due to his stunned state, couldn't react before the shuriken buried itself into his stomach.
It was just after this that Kirine landed behind him. She had been a bit distracted having to help Hinata and Shino deal with the rest of the bandits that they hadn't knocked out. Even still, she had heard every word over the earpiece, as had Hinata and Shino. Even still, she was surprised at the speed it had taken for Naruto to dispatch a Chunin. Naruto himself wasn't surprised at all. Lee was far stronger than the dead nuke nin, even if he couldn't use ninjutsu or genjutsu.
"Naruto, you know, Kurane started only to be cut off by her student." "It's okay, sensei. This isn't the first time I've killed someone. The way I see it, if I hadn't killed him he could have become a threat to not only myself but you guys as well. Though he probably would have only been an annoyance to you," stated the blonde, getting a worried nod from Kurane. Still, the rookie Junin couldn't help but wonder and worry about things when it came down to her blonde student. Not for the first time she found herself cursing the villagers for what they'd done to the boy before her. She also couldn't help from wishing she could have helped him when he was younger. Demon vessel or not, no one deserves to go through the things that he'd been through in his short life. She silently vowed to herself to make it up to the boy before her. Small clearing within the forest surrounding Konoha Uzumaki. Naruto could be found panting in exhaustion. Several of the trees around him had slashes in them, showing the results of his training. Almost as soon as they had returned from the capital, Kirine had upped the training of the entire team. The first thing she had done was teach the trio the tree climbing exercise. After this, she had increased the time they spent training. Individually, however, she had sent Hinata and Shino to learn their family techniques. Since then, Shino's father had been training him personally in his family techniques. Hinata, on the other hand, couldn't do this due to the fact that her father had already abandoned her training, though she said she'd be fine. Naruto, however, was different. Seeing as the blonde had no family, he had started to spend more time around Kurane. As such, Kurane had taught him how to tell if he was caught within a genjutsu and several different ways to cancel them. Other than that, the blonde spent his time either training alone or sparring with Lee. Aside from this, the group's teamwork had grown greatly. After the confrontation with Mizuki, Shino had approached Naruto about the things that he'd heard that day. True to Sandame's beliefs, Shino had indeed been sympathetic with the blonde, as he himself was in a similar situation. After all, people tended to stay away from Abarames due to the fact that they shared their bodies with bugs. Hinata, however, had needed no words to convey her feelings, instead giving the blonde a hug and kiss on the cheek. Hinata had known of the Kyuubi for years since, mainly due to the fact that people tended to speak their minds when they thought no one was around. Of course, she had never told the blonde that she knew and had instead pretended not to know.
Looking up towards the sky, the blonde frowned at the position of the sun. He was never that good with telling time by the position of the sun. Still, he knew it was around 12 o'clock. As such, he picked himself off the ground and headed off to get something to eat. Each of the members of Team 8 had a certain food that they craved above all others. For Kurine it was sushi, Hinata cinnamon buns, Shino spicy foods, and for Naruto it was ramen.
As such, he found himself walking the familiar path towards Ichiraku's ramen stand. Along the way, he ignored the glares and killing intent coming to him from the villagers. As far as he was concerned, the civilians posed no threat to him, seeing as he could take them all on at the same time thanks to the cage bunshin. Such thoughts, however, were banished from his mind as soon as the curtains to Ichiraku's were moved aside. As the aroma of fresh noodles hit his nose, the blonde took his favorite seat at the counter as if in a trance, causing a certain waitress to giggle at his antics. Hokage Tower. Sandame stared at the genin team in front of him with barely concealed annoyance. Two of its members had just thrown a temper tantrum because they were tired of only doing D-rank missions. The third had simply stood brooding beside them, though his eyes said that he was demanding a higher level mission. Beside him, Iruka's eyebrow was twitching dangerously, and he was just moments away from blowing his top when the Sandame spoke up.
While I understand your desire for a higher level mission, I cannot allow it. Spoke the Sandame, catching the attention of all in the room.
While it is true that I have sent both teams 8 and 10 on C-ranked missions, I only did so after they completed the minimum amount of D ranks needed before they could take on a C-ranked mission. Your team, however, despite being together for 3 months, hasn't even completed 16. He paused here, taking a puff from his pipe before continuing. As it stands, you 3 are not ready for a higher level mission. It was only after he finished speaking that the old man noticed the 3 genin weren't even listening. Kiba was even talking about the new tricks his dog can do. Fine, you want a higher ranked mission, you'll get it, said Sarutobi, much to Iruka's shock. Before the genin could celebrate or Iruka could protest, the door opened and an old man carrying a bottle of sake walked in. These are the ninja that's supposed to protect me. They're just kids. They'll probably just get themselves killed. And what's up with that one? I mean, what kind of ninja has pink hair? Said the old man. These are just some of them. The others will meet you at the gate in an hour, Tazuna-san, said the old man, getting a nod from the old man, who proceeded to walk out the door. Another team. What gives, old man? Yelled Kiba. Be respectful to the Hokage, brat, yelled Iruka. Like I said, you 3 are not ready for a higher ranked mission. As such, I'm sending a team with you, that is. With that, the Hokage dismissed them, ending the conversation. An hour later found Tazuna and the members of Team 7, including Kakashi, at the gate waiting to see who the team would be. They were each surprised when Shino stepped out of the shadows on the side of them and leaned against the gates. 2 minutes later, Shino turned, looked up from the wall just in time to see Naruto and Hinata, wearing her canon outfit, land down in front of him. You're late, spoke the bug user in his usual monotone. Sorry, Otto-san held me up, said Hinata, getting a nod from the bug user. Not a second later, Kurane appeared in a whirl of leaves. So Kurane-sensei, what's last-minute mission I heard about? Asked Naruto. Escort and guard duty. Apparently Hokage-sama allowed a team to go on a C rank when they weren't ready. We're just going along as backup in case anything happens, spoke Kurane, getting nods out of her group. So the most we have to worry about is bandits, stated Hinata, getting a nod from Kurane.
Seeing this, all three remove scrolls from their pockets. Once done, they quickly swipe blood onto a part of the scroll, causing a few puffs of smoke. When it cleared, each of them had one kunai and shuriken holster each, along with several explosive tags and ninja wire.
Tazuna, who was leaning on the wall, couldn't help but be impressed with this group, even if they were still too young for his liking. Kakashi was also impressed, seeing as most genin had no idea how to seal away weapons. Sasuke, however, narrowed his eyes at the group having skills that he didn't. Right, well, everyone ready to go? Asked Kakashi, getting nods from his group. Team 8 looked at Team 7 before Naruto shrugged and walked out the gates with his teammates close behind him. As they walked, Sakura fired questions repeatedly towards Tazuna and Kakashi until Naruto had finally stopped her. Sakura, calm down and think for a second. You're asking questions that you already know the answers to, said the blonde, making the pink-haired girl blink before her eyes went wide in realization and a sheepish look took over her features. Kakashi, whose nose was buried into an Icha Paradise book, couldn't help but be grateful for the silence, while Sasuke simply smirked since the fangirl had stopped talking. An hour later, and Naruto was barely resisting the urge to take out his own copy of the infamous Orange Book. In fact, the only thing stopping him was Kurane's presence and the knowledge that the Junin hated perverts of any type with a passion. Naruto, however, only read the book because of the story. Still, it was too risky with Kurane.
Hinata he wasn't worried about, since she read them as well. Hell, they even read them together. Normally this wouldn't be done unless they were a couple, but seeing as how they were in all but title, they let it pass. At the moment, Hinata was just content in the knowledge that she had him, and that was all that mattered.
The next day, things had progressed much the same way as it had the previous day. The only exception was that the group made its way to Wave without Sakura's bombardment of questions. Instead, she had chosen to stick by Hinata in hopes of starting off a conversation. She was surprised with how easy it was to talk to the girl who hardly talked to anyone in the academy.
Naruto himself walked next to Shino in a companionable silence as he took in the scenery. As he did this, he couldn't help but chuckle as something on the road caught his attention. Shino, hearing the sound, rose an eyebrow, to which Naruto tilted his head forward to in response.
Shino shrugged his shoulders once he saw what had caught his teammates' attention: a puddle on the side of the road. Kakashi, who was walking at the rear of the group, couldn't help but be impressed with the members of Team 8, as each of them had noticed something out of place, unlike his own students. Even Hinata, who was still talking with Sakura, had seen it, though she pretended she didn't. Almost as soon as they passed the seemingly harmless puddle, two people emerged from it wearing clawed gauntlets that had a chain connecting them to each other. Moving quickly, they made quick work of Kakashi, wrapping him up within the chain and pulling. Blood and guts sprayed through the air as the blades around the chain sliced through the masked shinobi. One done, spoke the duo in unison as they sped towards their next target, Kurane. Before the raven-haired beauty could react, she had suffered the same fate as Kakashi. Sakura screamed at seeing such a thing happen, while Kiba and Sasuke froze in shock. Team 8, however, were already moving, with Shino staying back to guard Tazuna as Hinata and Naruto charged forward. Sasuke, quickly shaking himself out of his shock, quickly threw a kunai into the links of the chains. Without pause, the attackers released the chain connecting them to each other before speeding towards their target. Unfortunately for the long-haired one, he had the displeasure of his stomach being introduced to Naruto's outstretched fist. Because of his speed, he doubled over, though he quickly managed to regain his composure. Naruto winced as the claws from the man's gauntlet scratched his side as his opponent pulled away. He didn't get far as Shino took that moment to make his presence known. Standing behind the man, he gave him a solid back fist to the head. The man stumbled forward right back towards Naruto. Once he was in range, Naruto jumped into the air and delivered a vicious spin kick to the man's neck, sending him crashing into a tree. Meanwhile, the other made for Tazuna, only to be forced to dodge a palm strike from Hinata. As he spun around the girl, he was surprised when she ducked his claw swipe and gave him a few strikes into the lower portion of his arm. Still continuing past the girl and ignoring the sting in his arm as well as the smirk on her face, he continued towards Tazuna. Sasuke, seeing this, hopped in front of his still frozen teammates, only for Kakashi to appear in front of him and knock the nin out with a clothesline. "Sensei, you're okay," said Sakura in relief. "Of course they are, they're Junin for a reason, Haruno-san," said Shino in his usual monotone. "Good job you guys, though I didn't think you would freeze up like that, Kiba," said Kakashi. "These guys are Chunin level nuke nin from Kirigakure no Sato, Kakashi," said Kurane from her position above the now tied up. "They're known as the Demon Brothers, and are known to keep fighting no matter the circumstance," said Kakashi, his voice serious and his single exposed eye hard as steel. "You guys check for injuries, specifically slash marks. Their claws are often poisoned," said the Scarecrow to the gathered genins. Naruto scowled hearing this before walking over and delivering a brutal kick to the ribs of his former opponent, shocking everyone. At least until they saw the slash mark on the blonde's side and understood his anger. Especially Team 8, as they knew exactly why the blonde was mad. "We need to talk to Zuna-san," said Kurane, her red eyes narrow and tone icy. The sake-drinking old man shifted uncomfortably under the Junin's gaze but nodded nonetheless. Seeing this, both Junins led the man away from the genins so they could speak in private. While this was going on, Naruto had chosen to sit against a tree as he felt the itch of his skin stitching back together. Kami, he hated when the fox healed him because then he'd have to hear him bitch. "You are weak, Gaki. Letting this weakling ninja even put a scratch on you is enough to show that," came Kyuubi's mocking voice. "Shut it, furball, I don't have the patience or desire to deal with your bitching right now," replied the blonde mentally. Kami, he hated that fox. Years ago, he and the fox had realized they held a mutual hatred of one another even if they were stuck with each other. Still, that didn't mean that either of them would give up on getting rid of the other. For Kyuubi, it would be a simple matter of flooding enough Yuki into the boy's system to kill him. This is why Naruto had never allowed for any of the fox's power to leak out. For Naruto, however, it would be a different matter altogether. He had found not one safe method of ridding himself of the fox without killing himself in the process, and he'd been looking since they had first come into contact with one another. His thought process, however, was soon interrupted by the return of the Junin. After a bit of an explanation for why Tazuna had lied about the mission's rank, they had all eventually agreed to continue, some more reluctantly than others. Later, Kakashi sat quietly in his position in the back of the boat. He knew that their next opponent would no doubt be a Junin. If it were just Kurane and himself, this wouldn't have been a problem. However, they were currently traveling with 6 rookie genin, meaning they'd be forced to protect them. He knew that Kurane knew this as well, yet the woman wasn't fazed by this knowledge in the slightest. In fact, the rookie Junin was exuding an aura of confidence not in herself, but in her team. It was as if she expected them to be able to stand up to Junin-level Shinobi, which was ridiculous. Sure, they had managed to take down the Demon Brothers, but that was most likely because they were most likely not even giving the kids their full attention. He knew for a fact his own team wasn't ready for anything of this level. Hell, they could hardly work together well enough to catch that stupid cat. Now they were expecting to take on a Junin and walk out of it as if it was nothing. They'd be lucky if they got out of this mess with all the team members in one piece, much less alive.
A set of gasps sounded as the Konoha genin as they laid eyes on the magnificent, though unfinished bridge through the surrounding mist. While Sakura and Hinata gasped, Kiba whistled at the sight, and Sasuke's eyes went wide before he quickly regained his composure. Though it was unseen behind his glasses, Shino's eyes had also went wide at the sight. "Wow." The whispered comment of the single blonde-haired youth held the collective thoughts of the group of 12-year-olds. Kirine allowed herself to smile at that, seeing as the genin still held some of their childish innocence.
Not long later they had finally reached land and climbed off the boat, which silently left after all its passengers had departed. Moving quickly, the group headed off, hoping to reach Tazuna's home without any trouble. Unfortunately, this was not to be, as they were all forced to the ground.
Looking up, Naruto saw a large sword embedded into the trunk of a nearby tree. On the hilt of the sword stood a man clad in gray shinobi pants with white bandages wrapped around his ankles. He wore no shirt, though his face and torso were covered by bandages. Black hair topped his head as his black eyes took in the sight of the group before him. Finally, a slashed kiri hite was tied to his forehead, the metal plate on the side of his head.
Well, if it isn't a class missing Nin Momochi Zabuza, stated Kakashi, stepping forward. Well, if it isn't Sharingan Kakashi, no wonder the Demon Brothers failed, stated Zabuza in a gruff voice. At hearing the word Sharingan, Sasuke went wide-eyed before turning to look at his sensei.
You guys guard Tazuna, this one's way out of your league. For this battle I'll have no choice but to use this. With that said, the silver-haired man raised his forehead protector from over his covered eye, exposing the single red eye that it hid 3 black comma marks spinning slowly around a black pupil. To see the Sharingan so early, I'm honored. While I was a part of Kiri's Anbu, I memorized the bingo book. And while the female you're with wasn't in it, I learned much about you. The man who has copied over 1,000 jutsus, the copy ninja, Sharingan Kakashi. Finished the nuke nin, getting shocked looks from the genin with the exception of the lone blonde and Shino.
With that said, Zabuza disappeared from off the tree along with his sword before reappearing on the lake. Once on the lake, he quickly took a stance with his left arm held upwards and his right held across his chest. Kirigakure no jutsu, muttered Zabuza before the mist began to thicken all around them and his killing intent began to leak through the air.
Kakashi tensed as the mist blocked his sight, effectively making his Sharingan useless. He could feel the tension rolling off the genin in waves and turned, seeing Sasuke, who was holding a kunai shakily between 2 hands. Looking more like he was about to stab himself than any threat.
Sasuke, calm down, I'll protect you guys. I don't let my comrades die.
Closing his eyes after calming his student, the silver-haired Junin strained his other senses trying to find his opponent. His eyes shot open as he realized where Zabuza would head and he dashed towards the group of genin and Tazuna. Zabuza appeared between the group long before Kakashi could arrive, causing his mix-matched eyes to widen. Unfortunately for the nuke nin, he forgot about something, and that something had long raven black hair, red eyes and the body of a goddess. He was brutally reminded though when a kunai was rammed into his back in the center of his spine. Kirine's eyes widened when Zabuza burst into water and she cursed. Zabuza took that moment to appear behind the stunned Kakashi and slice him in half. He was surprised, however, when Kakashi burst into water as well.
Amazing, he copied my jutsu even in this mist, thought Zabuza. Give up, Zabuza, it's over, said Kakashi, emerging behind the nuke nin, a kunai held to his jugular.
Before he could even speak up, Zabuza noticed the tree branches wrapping around him before Kirine appeared over him with a kunai aimed at him. Zabuza laughed at that, and to the shock of both, Junin slit his own throat on Kakashi's kunai, bursting into water. Before either of them could react, Kakashi was hit with a kick to the chest that sent him flying into the water. In the same motion, Zabuza spun and hit Kirine with the flat side of his sword, sending her flying into the water along with Kakashi.
Kakashi and Kirine rose out of the water slowly. As they were doing this, Kakashi couldn't help but notice how the water seemed heavier than it should.
Fool! Suoro no jutsu, said Zabuza before he and a clone trapped both Junin within twin spheres of water. With both Junin out of action, Zabuza quickly created more clones to send towards the genin, knowing no genin could stand up even to a clone of himself. Kakashi's eyes widened seeing this and he quickly shouted over to the genin.
Run, his clone can't follow you too far before falling apart.
Sorry Kakashi-san, but I can't do that, said Naruto calmly. A challenge has been issued and it would be rude to ignore it. Besides, I'm not leaving my sensei to such a grim-looking future. Finished the blonde, shocking the members of Team 7. Kakashi gritted his teeth hearing that. While he didn't care about the blonde, he wouldn't allow him to get his team killed with him. Before he spoke, he caught Kirine's confident look once more before turning his attention back to the genin.
That's not our mission. Our mission is to protect the bridge builder, nothing else, said Kakashi.
So you're saying the mission is more important than our comrades? Said Shino with his voice as emotionless as ever, though the buzzing coming from him was enough for his teammates to tell he was agitated. Kakashi, hearing this, decided enough was enough and decided to let them know just who they were dealing with. Momochi Zabuza, the demon of the mist, the man who killed an entire graduating class before he was even eligible to become a shinobi. Zabuza laughed after Kakashi finished his speech, remarking on how those were good times. Finally, however, the Nuke Nin had enough talking and sent his clone forward with a mental order. The clone headed towards the genin at quick speeds and in seconds reached the blonde and swung his fist towards the blonde. Naruto saw it coming, however, and had acted accordingly. As soon as the clone swung, the blonde parried it before driving his elbow into the clone's stomach with enough force for it to burst into water, much to Kakashi's and Zabuza's shock.
Naruto, seeing this, made his move, speeding onto the water and continuing to run while running through seals before ending on the seal for tiger. Kakashi's eyes went wide seeing this before Naruto's chest pumped out and he brought his hand to his mouth, exhaling a massive fireball. Kaiten. Gokakyu no Jutsu. Both Zabuzas on the water smirked seeing this before channeling chakra to their blades and slashing the attack in half, forcing it to dissipate.
What did surprise him, however, were the small fireballs that followed the giant one. He laughed though when the fireballs passed by him and his clone harmlessly. Everyone was shocked when the fireballs puffed into smoke and turned into Naruto once he got behind the Nuke Nin and proceeded to throw both kunai and shuriken at the man. Zabuza, seeing this, quickly jumped to the side avoiding the barrage, though his clone wasn't so lucky and was quickly turned back into the water it was made from. Zabuza snarled and quickly went to slice the blonde in half, only for his sword to be blocked by the freed Kakashi, who got up with his single Sharingan spinning furiously.
I see he got me so worked up I slipped up and released the water prison, said Zabuza quietly. You didn't release it, you were forced to, said Kakashi, catching everyone's attention. From the beginning the plan had been to free the Junin, since I knew I couldn't win. Before I even came near the water I put everyone under a genjutsu, making them think I was walking on water so you wouldn't react in time or no one would say anything when you didn't react. After I beat your clone and sent that Gokakyu no Jutsu, I took that moment to create a single Kage Bunshin and hang it into a shuriken.
The Kage Bunshin then proceeded to use the Hosenka no Jutsu while throwing me disguised as a shuriken, as well as several other shuriken that were hidden within the fireballs. As the fireballs passed you guys, several of Shino's Kikai bugs jumped onto the clone from one of the shuriken and proceeded to drain the clone, though thanks to my weapon's barrage it only looked as if it was dissolved thanks to the kunai and shuriken I threw. Once Naruto finished relaying his plan, the members of Team 7 were looking at him with wide eyes. Shino was smirking behind his collar since it was one of the many moves the team had come up with should they ever be forced to fight at a distance. Then, as if to prove his point, the Naruto on the land disappeared in a puff of smoke.
You know, Zabuza, I don't fall for the same move twice, said Kakashi. Skipping the rest of the fight since it's the same as the manga.
Kakashi, seeing the threat over with, quickly headed back towards the two teams and their client. Unfortunately, as soon as he reached the shore he hit the ground, passed out. Before anyone could overreact, Kirine stepped forward and covered his Sharingan.
It's just chakra exhaustion. Since the Sharingan uses a lot of chakra, it tends to drain people extremely quickly, said Kirine. What she neglected to mention was this only happened to Kakashi since he wasn't an Uchiha. And while it did drain chakra from an Uchiha, it wasn't as severe since the eye was an actual part of them.
Well, I'd say you guys deserve a rest, which you'll get at my home once we get there," said Tazuna with a grin at the group. As Naruto went to create clone to pick up the down Junin, Kirine beat him to it and picked up her masked counterpart. Naruto looked at his crimson-eyed sensei, who simply shook her head, causing him to shrug. Kirine smiled at the gesture from the blonde. She knew Naruto would have carried Kakashi if she'd asked, and look at it like a good training opportunity. Still, she was a Junin, and as such she believed she could do something as simple as carry Kakashi. Besides, if she was lucky, she'd be able to see what he's hiding under that damn mask now.